The thing about houses is they breathe. Walls hold air, and that air holds sound. And if you've lived somewhere long enough, you learn where that sound travels, the specific pockets and channels the architect never thought about when he drew the plans. Renata Coleman Banks had lived in this house on Briarfield Drive for 16 months. She knew that the back staircase amplified voices from the kitchen. She knew the bathroom off the master had a pipe that knocked twice every morning at 6 a.m., regardless of whether anyone was running water. She knew that the old kitchen vent connected, through some quirk of construction she'd never fully understood, to the far end of the upstairs hallway, which was why she'd always been able to smell dinner from up there before she'd ever come downstairs.
She also knew her husband had no idea she was home. The catering van had broken down 3 blocks from the Buckhead venue at 4:47 p.m., and her sous chef Keandra had handled the whole event without her.
Go home, Nita. I have got this kitchen under control. You've been looking wore out all week, and you need to rest. So she'd called an Uber, tipped the driver $12, kicked off her shoes at the front door the way she always did, and moved across the hardwood floors in her socks. She'd heard his voice before she got to the bottom of the stairs, low and settled, satisfied. The specific tone a man gets when he thinks he's already counted the money.
3 more days, D. That's it. 3 days and the trust transfers fully into her account. $2.3 million. And under Georgia marital property law, half of everything she accumulates after the date of marriage belongs to me. Then, no, she doesn't know.
She thinks I love her, man. Another pause, followed by a short, flat laugh. The kind that isn't really a laugh at all, just a sound a person makes to fill space. Love her. I love what Roosevelt Coleman left in that trust account. Renata stood at the bottom of the stairs and did not move.
Devin, I've been inside this marriage 14 months. 14 months of playing her loving husband, going to Sunday dinners with her mama, pretending I'm invested in her little catering business. I have put in my time. In 72 hours, I file the divorce papers, and by the time the lawyers sit down across from each other, I'm walking out of this with over $1 million, her vehicle, and half the equity on this house. All because she told me about the trust on date number 4 and I paid attention.
A longer pause while the other voice, Devin, said something Renata couldn't make out. Is she smart? Derek's voice again, a dismissive breath. She's not that smart. Renata's right hand found the banister. She gripped it. She was that smart. She was, in fact, considerably smarter than she had ever allowed him to see. 14 months earlier, the first time Renata Coleman Banks laid eyes on Derek Banks, she was sitting alone at a table at her cousin Tanisha's birthday party, watching people dance to music nobody under 40 was supposed to recognize. The venue was rented, the shrimp was mediocre, and Renata had already decided she was leaving at 9. He'd walked over with a plate of food and a confidence that shouldn't have landed on her the way it did. She was 41 years old. She'd been through enough men to recognize performance when she was looking at it. But something about him was different in a way she couldn't immediately place. He wasn't trying too hard. He wasn't running any game she could identify on sight, which was either because he was genuinely different or because he was running a game she hadn't seen before. "You're not dancing," he said. "Observant," she said. He laughed, not at her, just genuinely, like she'd actually caught him off guard. And then he pulled out the chair beside her without asking, which was either bold or presumptuous, and sat down. "Derek Banks." He extended his hand. "Renata Coleman." She did not extend hers. "And I don't know you." "That's why I'm sitting here," he said, still smiling. "To fix that." She thought about that exchange now, standing at the bottom of those stairs with her hand wrapped around the banister, and the memory tasted like something that had been fine yesterday and turned overnight. She'd thought his boldness was confidence. She'd thought the way he listened meant he cared. She'd thought 64.
Stop! That part could wait. Right now, she needed to think clearly. She needed to move.
3 weeks after Tanisha's party, She'd run into Derek at the Kroger on Flat Shoals. She'd almost let herself believe it was coincidence. She knew better now. She'd mentioned the Kroger in conversation 64 not as an invitation, just as the filler detail you drop when you're trying to seem normal and relaxed around someone new 64, and he had filed it. She just hadn't known that yet. He'd offered to carry her bags. She'd said no. He'd offered to buy her coffee from the Starbucks inside the store. She'd said, "It's 3 in the afternoon." He'd said, "Coffee doesn't have a bedtime." And she had laughed. That was the exact moment, she knew now. Not the first kiss. Not the dinner at the restaurant in Inman Park where they'd stayed until the staff was visibly wanting them to leave. Not even the night she'd worn the green dress, and he'd said, "Renata, you make everything else in the room look like it's trying too hard." It was the laugh in the Kroger aisle, in her work clothes, holding a bag of yellow onions, that had swung something open in her, that she'd spent years learning how to keep shut. Her therapist, Dr. Miriam Okafor, had told her 2 years prior, "You don't do gradual, Renata. You guard yourself right up until something gets through, and then you're all the way in before you've had time to evaluate whether you should be." She'd said the goal was to build a middle, to practice the in-between space where you trust someone a little before you trust them completely. Work on the middle, Dr. Okafor had said. Renata had not worked on the middle. Her father, Roosevelt Coleman, had died 18 months before she met Derek. Lung cancer. 9 weeks between diagnosis and funeral. The kind of speed that doesn't let a person prepare, that just hands you the grief fully assembled and expects you to carry it. He'd been 67 years old, a retired machine parts supervisor from Macon who'd moved the family to Atlanta when Renata was 12, who'd never owned anything flashy in his life, who'd clipped coupons and turned off lights when he left a room, and driven the same Buick for 11 years. He had also, quietly and carefully, saved and invested for 40 years. He left Renata the house she grew up in, which she'd sold, and a trust structured by his estate lawyer with a 2-year waiting period. Roosevelt's exact words to her, as relayed by the attorney, were, "I don't want you doing something reckless out of grief. Let it sit. 2 years. Then it's yours to do whatever you decide." The trust would transfer 2 years after his death, fully. No conditions except time. $2.3 million. She had told Derek about the trust on their 4th date. Not carelessly. She'd thought about it, had decided that transparency was what she was committed to this time around, that she wasn't going to play the close everything woman she'd been in her 30s. She hadn't told him the amount. She hadn't told him the timeline. She'd just said, "My father left me a trust. It releases sometime next year." What she didn't know until 72 hours ago was that Derek had a cousin named Marcus who practiced estate law in Savannah, and that Derek, after their 4th date, had called that cousin and described the situation in just enough detail for Marcus to locate the publicly filed trust documents and identify the transfer date precisely. She knew this now because she had done her own research, quietly, in the past 3 days. She knew a great deal of things now. When Derek had first brought up marriage, Renata's mother, Miss Gloria Coleman, had set down her tea mug on the kitchen table with a sound that was not quite a slam, and looked at her daughter across the distance of 41 years of knowing her better than anyone.
9 months,
Miss Gloria said. "Mama, 9 months is a baby, a premature one. That's how long you've known this man. We talk every day. I know him." "You know what he's shown you." Miss Gloria picked her mug back up. "Those are 2 different things, Renata Marie, and you have lived enough life to know that. You gave him the cornbread recipe. Last Sunday, you gave it to him." "I give the cornbread recipe to my mail carrier at Christmas. That's just being hospitable. Don't confuse it for an endorsement." Renata had smiled at that. She was smiling at it now, standing at the bottom of her stairs, and her eyes were burning, and she was not going to cry. She absolutely refused, 'cause crying meant losing focus, and she could not afford to lose focus right now. Her mother had seen something, or Renata had seen it too and decided it was something else, which was worse in a way, because it meant she'd had the information and filtered it through what she wanted to be true. She'd wanted this man to be real. She'd been 41 years old, and she'd built everything she had herself. The business, the house, the reputation. And there was a very specific exhaustion that comes from having nothing to hand anything to at the end of the day. Derek Banks had walked through the door of that exhaustion like he already had a key. That one crack, that was all he'd needed. The wedding had been small by choice. 31 people, a venue out in Stone Mountain, with good natural light, and all the food catered by her own kitchen, because she trusted no one else's hands with something that mattered. Tanisha had been her maid of honor. Derek's best man was Devon. D, the man currently on the other end of the phone upstairs, confirming a timeline.
She'd like Devon at the wedding.
He'd been quiet in the way she associated with people who were listening more than they were talking, which she'd always respected. He'd given a toast that was short and specific and actually funny. She'd told Derek afterward, "Your friend Devon is good people." Derek had just smiled and said, "Yeah, we go way back to when Devon, apparently, was helping plan this." The vows had been Derek's suggestion, traditional, the standard ones. She'd wanted something personal, written specifically for each other. He'd said, "I'm not built for flowery language. The old words say everything I actually feel. Why reach for new ones when the right ones already exist?" She'd found it endearing, practical and sincere, she'd thought. She'd stood in the dress her Aunt Cheryl had helped her choose, and she'd meant every word she spoke. And he had stood across from her and said his words back with his eyes level and his voice unwavering, and she had believed him. Every single word she had believed. She needed to move. Standing at this banister any longer was just giving her more time to feel the specific, nauseating feeling that always preceded her fury. She'd felt it in 2015, when her first business partner had been skimming receipts. She'd felt it when the kitchen contractor had been padding invoices, and she felt it now, that cold, sick wave that meant her brain had already absorbed the full picture and was waiting for the rest of her to catch up. The rest of her was catching up fast. She needed him to not know she was home. She needed to get outside, get to her car, make the calls she had to make, and get back in before he came downstairs. Because here was the thing. Here was the critical thing. She'd already heard something 3 days ago. Not this call. A different one. Shorter. Pieces caught through the same kitchen vent while she was upstairs reading before bed. The filing date has to be after the transfer. And make sure she doesn't switch attorneys. The one from Decatur isn't a divorce specialist. And 3 weeks, D. We're almost there. She had stood in that hallway 3 days ago and let the full meaning of what she'd heard settle over her like cold water finding every surface. And then she had made a decision. She was not going to let him see her knowing, not until she was ready. 3 days she'd been sitting with this. 3 days of making his coffee, asking how his workday went, sleeping 6 inches away from him in the bed they'd picked together from a furniture showroom in Buckhead. 3 days of performing the role of a wife who didn't know, while making moves in the background he had no visibility into at all. The attorney she'd called wasn't the one from Decatur. She'd found a woman named Sandra Pittman, who ran a practice out of Midtown, whose name came up 3 times across 2 different sources when Renata searched specifically for attorneys who handled marital financial fraud in Georgia. Sandra Pittman had taken her call on a Saturday morning, listened without interrupting for 11 minutes, and then said, "Can you be in my office Monday at 10? She'd also called the trust administrator directly, asked specific questions about protections built into the original structure, gotten specific answers that her father's meticulous, careful nature had made possible in ways she was only now fully appreciating. She'd called her accountant, Vera, who'd been running Coleman's Tables books for 6 years, and who, when she heard what was happening, said simply, "Tell me what you need and I'll have it ready before the close of business tomorrow." And she'd called Tanisha.
Nita.
Tanisha's voice had gone very still. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, T. I mean, we should say out loud that we could be wrong. I want to put that on the table." "We're not wrong." "Okay," Tanisha said. "Tell me what you need me to do." Before we go any further, if you found this story and you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. We post stories like this every single week, and you don't want to come back next time and realize you missed everything in between. She pulled herself away from the banister. Carefully, she moved with deliberate quiet, the kind she'd learned from years of navigating loud commercial kitchens without startling her staff. She eased back toward the front door, picked her shoes up from the mat, opened the door with two hands, slow, controlling the sound of the latch, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled it shut behind her with a soft, clean click. Then she sat down on the top step in her socks. The Atlanta evening was cooling around her. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere on the left side of the street. A kid 2 houses down was on a bike. She let herself feel it. Not forever. She wasn't built for that and didn't have time for it. But she gave herself the space of a few minutes because she was a human being and not a machine, and she had loved this man, or she had loved who she'd believed he was. And those two things were different, but they both hurt in the same place. Because her mother had been right and she hadn't listened. Because Roosevelt Coleman's money that smelled like the man, like his Old Spice, and his patience, and his 30 years of turning off lights when he left rooms, had almost been used as a weapon against the daughter he'd spent his entire life trying to protect. Almost. She picked up her phone and sent a text to Sandra Pittman. 3 words. "It's time. Move." Then she put her shoes back on and went inside. When Derek came downstairs that evening at 6:45, Renata was at the stove. Shrimp and grits, his favorite. She'd decided on this deliberately, and with full awareness of exactly what she was doing. Making this man his favorite meal while holding the full knowledge of what he'd been planning was not kindness. It was a choice. It was her saying, silently, to the room and to herself, "I am in complete control of every single thing happening in this house right now, and you have no idea." She heard him stop at the kitchen doorway, heard the small sound of surprise he made. "Hey!" That warmth in his voice. She'd cataloged it as a dial now, a thing he adjusted. "Thought you had the Buckhead event tonight." Van broke down. She didn't turn around yet. She was focused on the pan. "Keandra ran the whole thing without me. I figured I'd make something good. Shrimp and grits." She could hear the smile in it. "What did I do to deserve this?" She turned around then, looked him right in the face, smiled. "Nothing yet," she said, "but there's still time." He crossed the kitchen and kissed her on the cheek, and reached past her to steal a shrimp from the pan the way he always did. And she let him, and she kept the smile exactly where it was, and not one cell of what she was actually thinking reached her face. This was the part nobody showed you. This was the scene that happened after every movie cut away, sitting across the dinner table from someone you were actively dismantling, watching him eat, listening to him talk about a workday he was probably only partially present for, all while knowing what you knew. She passed him the bread. He thanked her. She asked about his afternoon. He told her about a conference call that had run long. She said, "That sounds frustrating," and meant none of it, and he had no idea. And she ate her dinner and kept her face completely still. This was the slow, cold, precise work of it.
The following morning, she left the house at 9:15 saying she had a vendor meeting. She drove directly to Sandra Pittman's office.
Tanisha was already in the waiting room when Renata arrived, which meant Tanisha had gotten there early, because Tanisha had been her person for 34 years, and knew, without being told, that you showed up early for things like this. She stood up when Renata came in, and just held out her arms, and Renata let herself be held for exactly 4 seconds, which was enough. "You sleep?" Tanisha asked. Me neither. I kept thinking about the wedding, how he stood up there.
Don't!
Renata said. We're not doing that today. Sandra Pittman came out personally to bring them back, which Renata had noticed she always did. No assistant, no receptionist handing you off. She was 53, wore her silver locks loose, and had a stillness about her that Renata had found steadying every time they'd spoken. Her conference table already had folders open.
Here's where we stand,
Sandra said, sitting down without any preamble, the way people talk when they respect your time. 3 days ago, you contacted me after overhearing a phone conversation that indicated your husband intended to file for divorce, immediately following a trust disbursement, with the goal of claiming half those funds as marital property. Right.
We filed a protective separation notice 47 hours ago.
What that means, she glanced at Tanisha, is that any assets Renata receives or acquires from that filing date forward are legally designated as separate property, not marital property. The trust transfer is scheduled for this morning. The room went quiet.
So he gets nothing,
Tanisha said. His attorney, and he does have one, a man named Patterson out of Buckhead, who is expensive and who has handled cases like this before, will argue that the separation filing was itself a form of preemption, that Renata filed specifically to shield assets she knew were incoming.
But
Renata started.
But she filed after hearing something concerning and consulting an attorney. That is not fraud.
That is, legally and plainly, what any reasonable person does when they have reason to believe their spouse is acting in bad faith. There is no obligation to wait until you're damaged before you protect yourself. Patterson knows this. He'll still try it, but we are on solid ground. Tanisha exhaled. And the recording? The evening after she'd overheard the first call, Renata had gone upstairs while Derek watched the game. She'd stood in the hallway with her phone aimed at the vent and recorded a second phone call, shorter but specific. She'd heard him say, "She's completely in the dark, Devon. I'm telling you, she doesn't see any of this coming." And then, 48 hours. Papers are already drafted. All I'm doing is waiting. Georgia was a one-party consent state. She was one of the parties. Sandra had listened to both clips and said, "That's useful." And Renata had, by that point, learned that Sandra Pittman saying "that's useful" was the equivalent of most people saying "that's going to end him." She didn't go straight home from Sandra's office. She drove to her mother's house in Decatur, because she needed to before she could go back and continue performing. Miss Gloria was already on the porch when Renata pulled up. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms when Renata came up the steps. Renata let herself be held. She wasn't going to cry on the porch. She'd already spent her allotted time on the feeling, and she needed to stay sharp. But she stood there for a minute and let her mother's arms be what they had always been, which was enough. "How bad?" Miss Gloria asked. "Bad enough. Has he touched anything yet? Any account? Anything in your name?" "No." He was waiting for the trust to hit first. Miss Gloria pulled back and held her by both shoulders, at arm's length, in the way she had done since Renata was 8 years old, looking at her straight. "Then you have everything," she said. "Do you hear me? You still have everything." "I heard him say I wasn't that smart, Mama." Miss Gloria's chin went up slightly. "Of course he did." Her voice was even. "People who are planning to take from you have to believe you're not paying attention. Otherwise, they couldn't go through with it. They need the story of you being oblivious. That's the only way the scheme works." "I know." "Your daddy used to say that the person who gets deceived is never the fool in the story." Miss Gloria released her shoulders and sat back down in her porch chair with the particular deliberateness of a woman who has earned the right to sit wherever she wants. The fool is always the one who thought they were the clever one. She was home by 1:30 in the afternoon. Derek's car was in the driveway. He was working from home, which she'd noticed he'd been doing more of the past 3 days. Not traveling, not making excuses to be out of the house. Staying close, watching the calendar. She could see the countdown in the way he moved. A slight excess of ease that was its own kind of tell. The particular casualness of a man who keeps checking what time it is without looking at his watch. She made lunch, brought a plate to his home office, set it on the corner of his desk. He looked at her over it. "You seem different today." "Different how?" "I'm always quiet." "Not this kind of quiet." He was watching her carefully. He had good instincts. She'd always known that, had found it attractive, should have thought harder about what sharp instincts in a person could be used for. "You okay?" She looked at him. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said. "Trust me." He didn't say anything else. She went back to the kitchen. If this story has you gripping your seat right now, you're exactly where we want you. Do us a favor and subscribe before part 3 drops. We're building to something, and you need to be there for it. The next morning, Derek was in the kitchen making coffee when his phone rang from an Atlanta area code he didn't recognize. He answered it because he was the kind of person who always answered unknowns. You never knew which call was the one you were waiting for. "Mr. Banks, this is Attorney Webb calling from Webb, Hollis & Steele on behalf of Renata Coleman Banks. Miss Coleman Banks has retained this office regarding your marriage, and any further communications regarding marital matters should be directed to—" "What?" He turned around. Renata was standing in the kitchen doorway, robe on, coffee mug in both hands, watching him. She watched the understanding move through his face, the way weather moves across a field. First confusion, then calculation, then the moment it arrived. She saw exactly when he understood. She saw the specific instant he registered that she knew, and that she'd known, and that the 3-day window he'd been so carefully counting down had been a window she'd been using in a direction he hadn't anticipated. She raised her coffee mug slightly. Just a lift. "Good morning, Renata." He lowered the phone. The attorney's voice continued, a small murmur between them. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was something thinner, something she'd never heard before, and she recognized it because she'd been waiting for it. That was the real one. "Renata, just let me explain something. You should call Devin," she said. "Let him know the timeline's changed. Where are you getting— How did you— "The vent," she said. She gestured upward with the mug. "The kitchen vent. It connects up to the hallway. I've known about it since the first month we moved in." She let that settle. 3 days and all my money is mine. That's what you said. 3 days ago." He set the phone face down on the counter. "It wasn't what it— There's context you don't have. Derek." Her voice was flat and clean. No edges anywhere. "I'm not angry." And this was the true part. The part that would probably surprise him most. She was past angry.
Anger had come and gone in those first 20 minutes on the porch.
What she was now was something her mother would have called resolved. "I'm not angry. I don't need you to explain it. I've had 3 days and a very capable attorney, and I understand the situation completely." A capable. He stopped. "Who did you call?" "Sandra Pittman." Something moved in his face. A small collapse, barely visible, but there. "I know you know that name," she said. "Given that you specifically told Devin not to let me switch to a divorce specialist, you know who Sandra is." He put both hands on the counter, steadied himself on it. "The filing," he said. "When did you file?" 47 hours before the trust transferred." She took a sip of her coffee, set it on the counter. "Which happened at 9 this morning. Into an account your name has never appeared on." She held his gaze. "The timing, Derek, is the whole thing. You spent 14 months making sure your timing was right. I had 3 days. Turns out 3 days was enough. You can't— There are grounds to contest a filing like that, Renata. Patterson can make a case that— Patterson can try." She crossed her arms. "He won't get far. We have the recordings. Georgia's a one-party state, so that's legal. We have the financial consultation records showing your cousin Marcus pulled the trust documents. Sandra has the separation notice time-stamped 47 hours before disbursement, and she has a very clear argument about the difference between preemption and protection." She paused. You want to put all of that in front of a judge, I'll sit there all day." He didn't say anything. He was looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time, which maybe he was. Not the version he'd decided she was on date number 4. Not the woman he'd thought would be in the dark while he counted down, but the actual person. The one who had been standing here the whole time, paying far more attention than he'd credited.
"I want you out of this house by Friday," she said. "That's 4 days. Funnily enough, it's more time than you gave me."
"Renata!" His voice broke on the name, slightly. "I need you to hear me. In the beginning, yes, I knew about the trust. I won't lie about that. But somewhere in the 14 months, don't!" She picked up her coffee. "I am going to stop you right there, and I mean this kindly, because I don't have any malice left in me for you. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, I don't want it. Not because I'm bitter, because I'm done, and a speech right now is for you, not for me." His jaw tightened.
"I loved you,"
she said, and she said it simply, without decoration, the way you state something that's just factually true. "I loved who I believed you were. I walked down an aisle, and I meant every word. I want you to carry that with you, not as a weapon I'm handing you, but because I'm not going to pretend I was indifferent when I wasn't."
"I was a real person in this marriage."
She set the mug down. "You weren't, and that's the saddest part of all of this, if you want the truth of it." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, into the hallway, up the stairs, past the vent in the wall that had told her everything she'd needed to know, and into the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. She breathed. It was done. She didn't watch him pack. She heard it. The sounds of dresser drawers, of bags being dragged, of a man extracting himself from a place he'd planned to stay in until he'd taken what he came for. But she didn't stand at the window. That part wasn't for her to witness. She'd seen everything she needed to see. Tanisha came over that Friday evening with oxtail and festival bread from the Jamaican spot on Covington Highway and iced mango tea, and she didn't say one word about being right. That was the thing about Tanisha. She'd been right, and she knew she'd been right, and she was never going to make Renata hear it. She just came with food and sat on the back porch with her until the evening got dark around them. "You feel anything?" Tanisha asked eventually. Renata thought about it, really sat with the question. "I feel like something that was hurting got out," she said. "Like what?" "Like a splinter." She paused. "The kind that's so deep you can't get to it for a long time, and you almost forget it's there. And then one day it works itself out, and there's just relief." Tanisha looked at her sideways. "You're going to be okay." "I already am," Renata said, and she meant it, which was the thing that surprised her most. The divorce settled in 4.5 months, which her attorney told her was faster than average, and she told her attorney was still too slow. Derek's lawyer, Patterson, the expensive one from Buckhead, challenged the separation filing twice. Sandra Pittman answered both challenges with the same patient, unhurried specificity, and the second time she did it, Patterson apparently stopped calling. The recordings were never played in court. They didn't need to be. The filing timestamp was the argument, and it was an argument that held. Derek Banks walked away with his car, his, not hers, and a joint household account they'd opened at a credit union on Memorial Drive that had $4,216 in it. He walked away with his clothes and his furniture and a documented legal understanding, on record and signed, that any attempt to revisit the settlement would be answered with a civil fraud suit that Sandra already had 90% prepared. He did not walk away with $1 of what Roosevelt Coleman left. Renata renamed the business Coleman's Table in early spring. She'd quietly changed it from Banks Family Catering 6 weeks before the divorce finalized, just on instinct, because the name had always felt off in her mouth anyway. That spring, Coleman's Table landed the hotel contract she'd been working toward for 2 years, 3 locations, exclusive event catering. She hired a dedicated driver for the van because she was never again losing a contract over a mechanical breakdown. and she promoted Keandra to head of operations with a salary increase that made Keandra go quiet for a full minute before she said, "Renata, I need you to say that number again." Her father would have had thoughts about all of it, specific ones. In April, Miss Gloria came over on a Sunday with her pound cake. The one that took 3 pans and 2 hours and made the whole house smell like every good memory Renata owned. And they sat at the kitchen table together in the quiet of a Sunday afternoon. Miss Gloria looked at her daughter the way she sometimes did. A look that didn't cut, just held. "Your daddy would have had something to say about all of this," she said.
He would have said I should have seen it coming. He would have. Miss Gloria sliced the cake, and then after that, right after, he would have said the other thing.
"What other thing?" Her mother looked at her steadily. "That you handled it, Renata. He would have said you handled it." Renata looked at the kitchen, at the vent on the wall, at the place she'd stood barefoot and stunned, and 41 years old with her hand on a banister, at the house that was hers, completely and legally and without condition hers. And she looked at her mother.
Yeah, she said. I did.
She handled it. Not with noise. Not with drama for the sake of it. Not with a speech she'd rehearsed or a gesture designed for witnesses.
She had heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, and she had stayed quiet, and she had moved precisely, and she had protected what her father spent 30 years building and left to her in trust, because he believed she was exactly the kind of person who could. He was right. He always was. Roosevelt Coleman's daughter was always going to be exactly that smart.